The Baltimore Ravens appear poised for a Week 2 bounce-back win versus the Las Vegas Raiders, and Lamar Jackson support intensifies. All that and more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day on this Purple Friday. We're free and available for you all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel. In audio form, where that community is growing, you can follow along there as well. Really appreciate all of the support, and I'm so thankful for all the support I've already gotten here on this show. It's been incredible. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. We bring you 5 days per week. Well, not one, not two, not three, not four, 5 days per week of daily Ravens content, Monday through Fridays, our regularly scheduled content. We also go live for every Ravens big game right after. We have those instant reaction episodes after every piece of Ravens big news. We do that as well. We'll have some bonus episodes out. And plus, our first game day episode comes out Sunday, 6 a.m. We'll be doing keys, predictions, and a lot more on that episode. We have a lot to talk about today. The Ravens, they are looking for that bounce back win. They look poised to do so. We'll talk about why, look at certain statistics and matchups as to why. Then we'll also get into Lamar Jackson defense support is seemingly intensifying for the most part. Obviously, there are still some haters out there, but we've seen a lot of Lamar support this week, despite the loss to Kansas City. And I think, honestly, it should be that way. He should be getting support for his performance. Then finally, we'll talk about some general news and notes, some of the coordinators had to say, accountability, and a lot of other stuff here today. So let's first start off with why the Ravens appear to be poised for a bounce-back win against Las Vegas in Week 2. First of all, the Ravens need this game, but so do the Raiders. 0-2, it's not necessarily your season's over type deal. It shouldn't be. But if you look at last year, if I did the math right, the only team that made the playoffs last year after starting 0-2 was the Houston Texans. And that included other teams. Obviously, Cincinnati started 0-2. There were a bunch of others that did. The only team to come back from that 0-2 start and make the playoffs was the Texans. And honestly, if there was to be a team that would do that this year, I'd probably say it would be the Ravens. But as I say, and this is my famous saying that's been famous for about 2 weeks when I came up with it. I came up with it 2 weeks ago. September losses don't matter in September, but they matter in December. And I think the Ravens understand the importance of this game. Las Vegas is not a team that, is up to Kansas City's level. I will say they might be maybe a tad underrated. I think people maybe kind of lump them in with like, oh, they're getting a top 3 pick. I wouldn't go that far. They still have talent that you got to look out for, but I think they're a middling team that you should be able to beat. And we know that the Ravens, they do like to play down to competition sometimes. I mean, let's look back to last year. What happened last year? They lost to Gardner Minshew in that Colts team last season. Minshew's going to be starting for Las Vegas on Sunday, but they lost to Gardner Minshew in Week 3 of the season last year in a ugly slop 'em up type of game where there were a couple miscommunications down the stretch. That was the team they should have beat. Week 5 against Pittsburgh, they ended up losing that game because of wide receiver drops. That was a game they should have won had the receivers done their job. We see the Ravens get into close battles with other teams that you probably, they should be beaten by a lot of points. So the Ravens like to play down a competition sometimes, but we talked about them having a good loss to Kansas City, right? Good loss. You felt okay about it. It was a tough way to lose. There were certainly mistakes, things they have to shore up. But if they beat Las Vegas like 20-19, and it's like this down to the wire game, maybe Justin Tucker has to win it at the buzzer, that doesn't feel like a good win. That feels like a bad win. It feels like an ugly win. So, and again, the whole thing is, oh, you win, you're 1-0. It doesn't matter how, which is true. But I'd rather see the Ravens make a statement, and that's what I think they are poised to do on Sunday for multiple different reasons. The biggest one for me, the biggest one is the run game. This Ravens run game has to be on point against this Las Vegas defense. We know that the Raiders struggled against the run on Sunday against Los Angeles. Some former friends, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. Well, Gus didn't really necessarily get the job done, but J.K. certainly did. Had 10 carries for 135 yards and a score. Gus had under 3 yards a carry, which we knew, watching Gus in Baltimore for so long, is pretty uncharacteristic of him. But the Chargers averaged 6.5 yards on the grounds, and obviously Justin Herbert is not the threat with his legs that Lamar Jackson is. And so I think that the Ravens, the biggest key here, and we'll talk about this throughout the weekend as well, the biggest key, establish that run game early and stick with it. Stick with it. Give Derrick Henry 5 carries on the first drive again. Sure, that Las Vegas defense has guys like Max Crosby, has guys like Christian Wilkins. But to me, what have I been saying the whole time? It's you go and you establish it with multiple different players and make the defense fear multiple different guys. Make them fear multiple different sets. And then with that, if we're talking about run game effectiveness, the Raiders might have to start stacking the box up. Might have to start keying in or cheating in on a guy. Then the other guy can take it around the edge like Lamar Jackson, or he can run it up the middle like a Derrick Henry. If they are scared of a player, they will do what they can to kind of sell out to stop that guy in a way that they feel like, okay, we're giving the max amount of power we can to this guy while also being able to maintain everybody else. But in reality, the more a guy gashes you, the more you got to go and kind of figure it out. And the more you got to put more manpower on that. So if you can establish the run early, it's going to be so easy for them to work play action off of this. I mean, and some of these guys are going to be covering players like Mark Andrews, players like Isaiah Likely. I feel confident about, a Robert Spillane, Mark Andrews matchup, for example, or Robert Spillane, Isaiah Likely matchup, for example. Those are the types of things I would kind of hunt if I'm the Ravens. I go out there and try to find that, but it starts with establishing that. And that's why what Roquan said in week 1, I know it had a lot of controversy attached to it, but him saying, well, you got to stop Kansas City's run game and make them one-dimensional. That's true for every team. And that's one of the keys I laid out on Crossover Thursday yesterday. If you haven't checked that out with your boy Q of Locked On Raiders, be sure to go check that out. It was a great episode. But I think, to me, if you can establish that run game and keep the Raiders defense on their toes, especially for a team that, again, they gave up 6.5 yards per carry. Now, J.K. Dobbins had a couple of really big runs, certainly contributed to that, 61 yards being the longest. But hey, who says Derrick Henry can't have those runs? Just a couple of blocks on the next level. But there's that word, blocking. The offensive line has to be so big for them. Because again, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, it's not just like, oh, Chris Jones he's gone until the playoffs potentially. So the Ravens are scot-free on the offensive line because there are no quality pass rush. No. They have a lot lined up here in the first 5 weeks between those guys I just mentioned in Las Vegas. You got Buffalo, Dallas, Cincinnati, no particular order there. I know Dallas comes first, but man, you got challenges ahead of you. And I think it'd be good for guys like Daniel Falele, Patrick McCary, Roger Rosengard, and even Andrew Voorhees to get momentum under them. But the Ravens have to play physical. And they also have to be able to stop Devonte Adams. Make someone else beat you. Who on that offense do you fear? If it's me, there's one guy I key in on. There's one guy I target, and that's Devonte Adams, who obviously praised Lamar Jackson, called him the best ball carrier ever, said he watched his game when he was trying to improve elements of his own. A lot of high praise for Lamar Jackson by Devonte Adams. But you have to be able to key in on him. Make someone else beat you. Make it beat Jacoby Myers, Zamir White, Alexander Madison, anybody. Because if you let Devonte Adams beat you, Devonte Adams can beat you. Don't let Gardner Minshew get on the ball. Devonte Adams can be Gardner Minshew's safety blanket. Even let a guy like Brock Bowers run wild on you if you want. Now, ideally, don't let anybody run wild on you. But if it's Adams, it's just that's the guy. You can blanket him. You can do whatever you want with those coverage looks if you're Zach Orr. But I think, to me, if you can, first of all, eliminate the Raiders' run game, right? Stop Zamir White. Stop Alexander Madison. Make that game script go in your favor instead of the opposite way. And I think in week 1, we saw that where the game script got too far away from the Ravens and it cost them late. But if you can dictate the game script to you establish the power ground game. You take away the Raiders' run game. If you're Baltimore, all of a sudden, your pass rushers can be, they can pin their ears back. You got pass rush mode going on, and you can all of a sudden say, we know they're not going to run the ball effectively. We've taken that out. Well, let's go stop Devonte Adams and make Gardner Minshew beat us without his top target. That is a big thing. And I think the Ravens understand, that they're mad after week one. They wanted that game badly. And I don't expect it to be necessarily a 30-point blowout, which could be. But I kind of go in the 31-17 range. Double digit win for the Ravens. I think that'd be pretty solid overall. So plenty of keys for the Ravens. Obviously, penalties will be a big thing as well, especially the illegal formations. So we'll certainly see about that one. But especially for the Raiders, when you're looking at other matchups, there are a couple of others. But to me, I think the big one is just stopping Devonte. So Marlon, Brandon Stevens, you can throw stuff. Kyle Hamilton versus Brock Bowers is a big one. I mentioned Bowers a minute ago there. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, who's covering guys like Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman? Is it Jack Jones? Is it Nate Hobbs? Who is going to do that? I think the Ravens have advantages in a lot of key areas, and that's why I expect them to win this game. Coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking about Lamar Jackson, his defense intensifying, particularly in the national media. Stay tuned. We'll get a lot into the latest discourse and more on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn has it all. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to the perfect role in a given month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And the show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and I love going on FanDuel, finding all that they have to offer. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon on a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. If that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's double your winnings for all of Sunday. 9:15 pregame moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting Thursday, 9/12. View your account page now to learn more about your boost. So for the Raiders and Ravens game, the Ravens opened up at 9.5-point favorites over on FanDuel. That number has dropped to 8.5-point favorites. So if you like that line, head over to FanDuel. Let's visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Purple Friday. Appreciate everybody for tuning in again. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube and like the video. Follow along in audio form as well. We bring you 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. So if you have a friend or a family member who is a Ravens fan, wants some perspective on the Ravens and wants consistent daily coverage, be sure to have them come over our way on Locked On Ravens. This is episode 1335 consecutively on the weekdays. Plus, we'll be having a bonus episode tomorrow. We have something to talk about in terms of John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, maybe not being on the same page with each other in terms of Lamar and his physicality. And then we'll also be diving into a game day episode on Sunday. But speaking of Lamar Jackson, the discourse around Lamar, we all know it. It has been rather interesting, I guess, to watch it unfold over the course of his career. A lot of unfair narratives, a lot of things that are put against him, and other quarterbacks don't have those things put against them. And whatever you can say, Lamar has been, I'd say, rather overly criticized over the course of his career. Now, week one happens, and there were two schools of thought, I felt like, from what I saw, just discourse-wise, and obviously I thought Lamar had some things he had to clean up, obviously those two throws late, but man, I thought he did a lot. I thought he did almost everything he could. He had to put that Superman cape on a lot of different ways, and I was pretty proud of how he played overall. But we've kind of seen the national media take defense of Lamar a little bit for the most part. Again, for example, Nick Wright certainly has not, and that's something that, I'm not going to necessarily go super into detail on. I'm going to focus on the other stuff. Long story short, Joe Burrow still ranked ahead of Lamar Jackson on Nick Wright's quarterback pyramid, and that's all I got to say about that. But then you have guys like Colin Cowherd, who admittedly, Colin Cowherd was not a Lamar Jackson guy coming out of that 2018 draft. He was highly critical of him, was not a Lamar believer, and Cowherd has since apologized. He has taken back a lot of what he has said. And, he's been one of Lamar's honestly biggest national media defenders. So when he was on the Herd, he's been notably talking and defending Lamar over multiple different, platforms and conversation points. And he went to bat for Lamar Jackson and brought up a lot of really interesting comparisons that I wanted to bring up here. Now, first of all, Cowherd said that Lamar Jackson is underrated, which I still think to a degree is true. Obviously, he is in the spotlight now, considered by most at least a top 5 quarterback, if not better than that. But there are still a lot of people out there who don't believe in him. But Colin Cowherd essentially brought up his NFC record, which he's 20-1 against the NFC, which is still just absurd. And it's my not favorite stat. Lamar Jackson's one loss is to Daniel Jones in the NFC, which is just like, of course, out of all quarterbacks, it's to Daniel Jones and the New York Giants, who they looked awful in week 1. But Cowherd essentially said, look, if you don't face him regularly, he's even better than Patrick Mahomes. And what he meant by that is for teams that don't get to play him often, because it's a different thing. When you don't play Lamar regularly, when you're an NFC team, you play him once every 3 years, once every 4 years for the most part. You don't get to time him up. There's no preparing. We heard Travis Kelce, speaking of, player love, we talked about Devonte Adams in his comments. Travis Kelce said that Lamar is the hardest quarterback in the league to prepare for because you can't do it. There's not a guy like Lamar. You can't put a guy on a scout team. You can't put a fast guy on a scout team and say, go be Lamar Jackson. Teams try, but you can't be Lamar. Guys can't be Lamar. So when I'm looking at this, and you hear what Colin Cowherd says, it's like if you don't have the chance to be able to play him regularly, like let's say Pittsburgh, right? One of the reasons, not the only reason, it's far from it. One of the reasons that Pittsburgh, I think, has some success against Lamar is they've played against them a decent amount. Now, Lamar's actually missed a lot of games in that series, I guess, over the course of his career. I don't think he has played a full 2-game set against them ever as a starter. But, they get the chance to play him more often than not. Now, that theory is kind of proven false by the fact that Lamar just absolutely eviscerates the Bengals and the Browns on a yearly basis, and they get to play them twice a year too. But regardless, it's hard to kind of get on the field with Lamar, and it's just a whole different game as opposed to practice or watching film or doing that. So that's one of the things that Colin Cowherd said. But he also talked about the fact that, there's nothing in the league like him. You can't prepare for him, like I said. Like Colin said, but also he doesn't get any respect, and he can't just figure out why. And there are a lot of different reasons, I think. We could sit here for hours talking about the reasons why, but he also brought up a bunch of other quarterbacks that, either have similar athletic profiles or play the game similarly, at least in some way, shape, or form to Lamar, or, came in with questions and whatnot. For example, you want to talk about a guy that was universally loved off the bat. CJ Stroud, universally loved. You talk about Stroud and his record and Lamar's record, right? Lamar's record is incredible over the course of his career as a starter. CJ Stroud has had 1 year, right? 1 year as a starter in Houston. And the conversation around CJ Stroud entering his second year as a starter was, dark horse MVP candidate. Like, is he going to be able to go out there and, go do his thing? Like, oh, CJ's the best. Like, we love CJ. Like, that's the whole perspective. But when Lamar won his MVP his first year starting, what were the narratives coming out of that year after they lost to Tennessee? Right? Because it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly the same, but that was a young up-and-coming Ravens team. Obviously, they performed a lot better than Houston did in CJ's first year as a starter. But, Lamar lost in disappointing fashion in the divisional round, right? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. CJ lost in the divisional round too. But Lamar's narrative going into his second year as a starter was it a flash in the pan? 1 year wonder? Can he really keep it up? Is that really Lamar, or was that just a fluke? We didn't hear any of that with CJ. We didn't hear any of that. You can talk about some of the other stuff. Kyler Murray was loved, right? Really before Colin mentioned, the video game stuff came out and the clause in his contract and whatever, right? All that stuff came out and everybody kind of turned on him in a way. But Kyler was a guy that was loved. Kyler was a guy, came in as the number 1 overall pick, and people still talked about his height. But, there were a lot of other narratives that Kyler didn't get that Lamar got. And then he talked about, what about the whole, he's a runner thing? Well, Cam Newton, Colin said, was defended until he retired. The day he retired. Like, he was defended his entire career. That was that narrative. And Lamar doesn't get that grace. So there are just so many different things, so many different reasons, and so many different examples. And then we can obviously dive into, because the other part of this is with Lamar's defense kind of being picked up. We've heard other guys across the national media airwaves over these last couple of days. Chris Broussard still has the Ravens winning the Super Bowl. He came to Lamar's defense. You have guys like Drew Bledsoe, former players. Or we talk about that coming to Lamar's defense. A lot of guys, not everybody, but a lot of guys. Whereas now the conversation with Joe Burrow, you have James Jones now calling him out and saying that we don't give quarterbacks grace with injuries. Why has Joe Burrow gotten all this grace? He has to play better. That's a shift in what we've heard. It's usually been, it's not only Lamar, but it seems to be the loudest with Lamar with, the injuries. He's injured and everybody holds that against him. But you don't hear it. You never heard that for Joe Burrow and his wrist injury or the knee, right? But then Burrow puts up a stinker in week 1. And now we're starting to hear about it. Almost like a finally type deal. Because if you're going to judge one quarterback one way, you got to do it for everybody else. You can't just be the Lamar exclusive, right? You can't have it you can't have it one way, but not the other way. Got to be consistent for everybody. So, look, Lamar is one of one. He's an incredible talent. He does so much, both with his arm, with his legs. And, is he a perfect player? No, nobody is. I'm not sitting up here and saying he is. But, again, when he deserves to be criticized, he should be. When he deserves to be praised, he should be. And it just feels like that his mistakes are magnified and, some of the stuff that he does just get swept under the rug at times. So it's good to see some of the support for him come out a little bit, especially after tough loss to Kansas City, where, again, he seemed to put on that Superman cape. The 2 throws in the end zone late, not great. And I did criticize him for that, as a lot of other people did as well. But overall, the body of work in that game deserves praise, and it seems like he's getting that for the most part this week. Coming up, though, we're going to be talking about some news and notes from the last couple of days, talking about what some coordinators had to say, some players, and other things to dive into. So stay tuned, lots to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So, 1 Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. Plus, PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineup stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, your picks are still live on PrizePicks. So for this Ravens and Raiders game, if you want to pick the Zay Flowers more than receiving yards, or even Isaiah Likely, right? He had a great game in week 1. You pick his more than receiving yards, you could be in a good spot on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, rounding out this Purple Friday ahead of the Ravens Week 2 matchup with the Las Vegas Raiders. Appreciate everybody for being here and for all of the support on the channel and the show. If you're an everyday or you tune in every day, really appreciate you and all the support you've given me over the years, months, weeks, days, however long it's been. Appreciate you. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you'll stay a while here on the show and you like the content. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Follow along in audio format if you're somewhere in the middle. Welcome back to the show. Let's talk about a couple of news and notes before we head out of here. Some things to dive into, and it's some really important ones that we'll expand on during tomorrow's episode because it's something that I do want to talk about. We just didn't have the time. There are so many storylines throughout the season. You want to hit on as many as you can, but you also want to give the quality content, right? That's important here. It's important to me on Locked on Ravens, quality content. So one of the things, and this will be the big story for tomorrow, is John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson. Both were asked about their physicality, or at least Lamar's physicality. John Harbaugh on the field physicality. It's not, although he'll get in somebody's face, but we're asked about Lamar's physicality. And Lamar was asked, well, is you carrying the ball 16 times a game in the whole season, is that sustainable? And Lamar said, I don't know, but I'm not trying to find out. I'm not trying to find out. And then he went on to say, do anything it takes to win and right everything. But I think he wanted that game against Kansas City badly. We've talked about that with multiple people this week leading up to week 2 and recapping week 1. But I think that, yes, over the course of a season, you want to be able to take some of that workload off of Lamar Jackson's shoulders. Isn't that what you brought Derrick Henry in for anyway? To take some of that workload off, have a bell cow guy. It's going to be interesting these next couple of weeks really to evaluate the full first month of the year, what the usage is going to look like. And it will, again, shift once Keith Mitchell comes back from his injury. But we're going to have to see what it looks like. But Harbaugh was asked about it, and he kind of said, look, he's comfortable with physical football, team-wise. Said that anything it takes to win, kind of did that whole thing. But then there was a follow-up question about, is there a fine line? Is there a fine line between Lamar's protection and the physicality of what goes into it? And it ended up, Harbaugh cut off the reporter and said, we don't live in a world of fine lines. We live in a world of competing. And kind of went off on that. He's like, there are other fine lines, joked about the end zone, with Likely's cleat and everything being a fine line, but the other ones, he doesn't even pay attention to. And I don't think he meant it in like a malicious way. I think that's how it was taken by some people. I don't think he meant it as like, we're going to run Lamar into the ground and that's going to be that. I don't think that's what it was. But I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way of like, yes, if there's a running lane, Lamar should take it. Right? Because again, I'm not sitting here and saying Lamar had 16 carries and they were all designed runs. They weren't designed runs. So if, Lamar has to be able to go out there and scramble a little bit, pick up the yards with his legs, we're going to see that a lot this season. We're going to see a lot. But I also think getting some other runs in there with Derrick Henry will alleviate some of that pressure. Obviously, Lamar doesn't want to take unnecessary hits and, Harbaugh doesn't want him taking unnecessary hits, but, the message from Harbaugh was like, well, if that's what it takes to win, okay. And it kind of surprised me because I did think Harbaugh was going to take more of the, Lamar can do his thing with his legs and, we don't want him, out there just getting beat up on the whole game. But, if Lamar has to run the ball more to win, that's okay, this, that, and the other. But kind of was very like, no, whatever it takes to win, like whatever it takes. So, bit of a different viewpoint. Like it was a little shocking to kind of see. And again, Lamar did talk about, I'll do what it takes to win, but a little shocking with maybe a little different answers from both of those guys. Now, Todd Monken also spoke to the media here and was asked a couple of different things. He was asked about the formation, the heavy formation, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, there was no thought that, it would turn out the way it did with them anticipating playing the tight ends a lot. They did that, but, didn't expect them to have that amount of snaps with that look in there. It's not the norm, not going to have 80 given snaps, he said, like that, but they want to find ways to distribute the ball. He talked about the offensive line a little bit, talked about Lamar's leadership a lot, which was great. And then Zach Orr ended up talking a lot about, the Xavier Worthy touchdown, that communication. Zach Orr said it was all right. And he learned from his experience, the main thing, keep it simple. And I think that's good for Zach Orr at the beginning, right? You don't have to overcomplicate it for yourself. He's a talented defensive coordinator, a talented guy. And I think that over the course of the year, he will be able to just find his spots. So the coordinators, they did take accountability. They were open about the questions that they were asked, and big week 2 ahead for the Baltimore Ravens. So that's all I have for you here today on this episode of Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Be sure to, again, like and subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have a bonus episode for you, talking more about John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson, and this Ravens team as they gear up for week 2 of their season. Stay tuned. We'll stay right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.